You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi everybody, and thanks for coming back to the show. You're listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis, and I am Mighty Blue, or Steve Adams. This week we're lucky enough to have Sandi Marra on the show. Sandi is the president and CEO of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and for her and the whole hiking community, this has been an awful year. I wanted Sandi to come on and share with you all some of the rationale that she and the ATC board used in the decisions they have taken this year. Those decisions haven't always been popular in the community, and I wanted to find out directly from her how they were taken. I also wanted to learn a little more about Sandi's own hiking experience and her terrific record of volunteerism. I'm sure she's tough enough to take it, but some of the vitriol spilled on Facebook and other parts of social media has been directed personally towards her, and I wanted to give as wide a view of her activities as possible to give you all a greater perspective on her and her views. Sandi will be along shortly. Bill Tickner, or Mr. President, is finding out exactly why Pennsylvania is right up there on hikers' lists as, let's say, one of the least preferred states. That being said, he does meet up with some old friends, and he happens upon a listener to the show. Bill will be on after Sandi. Finally, Fozzie shows his humanity to a fellow hiker in distress. I found myself gripped as I was reading this part of the story. It is so well told. I hope that you guys can relate to it as well. So let's start with our very special guest, Sandi Marra. This week's guest is Sandi Marra, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. Hi, Sandi. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Were they your correct titles? I actually did it from memory, so I'm not sure I was right or not.
Yes, President and CEO. Those are the titles.
Okay, cool. Now, you've had quite the year, haven't you? But I'm going to come to that in a minute. Okay. But first, we'd like to know what kind of background that you have in hiking.
Sure. So I actually, to be honest, I started out as a volunteer working on the trail. So I didn't come to the trail through the hiking route. I came to it through the working route. And then I eventually also fell in love with hiking it, obviously. So when I was in my 20s and moved to Washington, I took a job with a nonprofit and worked with a woman who was an active member of the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club.
Right.
And one weekend she just said, "Would you like to come out to the woods with me?" And I had grown up in New Jersey. I mean, we did some outdoor stuff, but we weren't by any means a big outdoor family, weren't a camping family, anything like that. But I said, sure. So we went up to what ended up being the Blackburn Trail Center, which is a big hiker spot right 12 miles south of Harper's Ferry. And she introduced me that weekend. She kept saying, "This is my friend Sandi from New Jersey who's never seen a tree before," which wasn't quite the truth, but it was close. And had never heard of the Appalachian Trail, had no idea that it went through New Jersey. So kind of spent the weekend and just met some really incredibly interesting people. They were working on the cabin that weekend, and so kind of did some stuff that I never thought I would do before, and piqued my interest enough to kind of come back again and again. And then as I was doing these trips, I started really learning more about the trail itself.
Sure.
And so I found out, wow, there was this incredible national park and this trail that went from Georgia to Maine that people, hiked a little bit or all of it or some of it. And while it was still a national park, it was really managed and built and maintained by these folks that I was working with.
Amazing.
So I actually got involved first with the shelter crew, and Rod Hollow Shelter was the first shelter that I worked on. And then pretty quickly too, I mean, I was a somewhat active, young woman, and like even, like the club still today, you see somebody who seems engaged, and particularly if they're a little younger than 60, you kind of grab them up pretty quickly. So within a year or two, I found myself as the general secretary of PATC, and the rest is history. I mean, really, I just found my tribe, I think, through the hikers and the workers on the trail. The friends that I made then are still friends with me today. I met my husband working at Blackburn, and we got married up there, so certainly a lot of personal connection.
Sure.
And then the hiking started. So my husband went out and bought me Cindy Ross's book about women hiking on the trail, and this little paperback. So that was the first time I started kind of getting this idea, with all the things that women have to deal with in particular on the trail. And there weren't a ton. I mean, this was in the 80s. So there were women, but it's not like it is today.
Nothing like, is it? I mean, that's
No.
the most extraordinary thing to me. I went in 2014 and 2019, and the difference was extraordinary even between those two dates. So I imagine back in the 80s, virtually hardly anybody on there.
Yeah, it was, and a lot of us were the ones coming out of these trail clubs as the workers. So a group of us women in PATC kind of got into this habit of doing hikes, and we would do hikes on the AT. We'd do hikes in Shenandoah, backpacking trips. Then I did a lot of hiking out west. My husband and I, we kept saying we'd plan a long hike on the AT, and then friends would say, "Oh, we're going to the Wind River Range, or we're going to the Grand Canyon," and we're like, "Oh, maybe that's where we'll go this summer."
Was a long distance trail, a real long distance trail, ever in your future plans?
I am not a thru hiker. I'm really not. I've spent enough years being out there and being around thru hikers and long distance hikers. I mean, in my younger days, I would go out 4 or 5 days, and even then, I was ready to come off. Then find a restaurant, find
a shower,
find a shower, yeah, those kinds of things. And I think I'm there is variety on the trail, but I am I never cook the same thing twice. I have recipes that my husband says, "Oh, this is a keeper," and it'll be a year before he sees it again. So I feel like that kind of just everyday sort of thing, it's just after a while I need to get off and do something different.
Wow. So that's interesting. So you said you found your tribe, which is an interesting modern expression, isn't it? What does hiking give you, or is it the people that give it to you? Is it the hiking itself, or is it the people who are involved in hiking?
It's both. So there's times, and to be honest with you, right now, when I have the chance to go off, like just this past weekend, we went up and Chris was doing some work around Blackburn, and I said, I'm going to go for a walk. And he's like, "Oh, I'll come with you." And I'm like, "Yeah, no." Thanks anyway. And I just needed to be up there by myself, right? So,
Right.
I mean, I do tell people I've never hiked the entire HE, but I've probably hiked 2,500 miles on the same, 40-mile section that's right here in my backyard, from the multiple times I've hiked these different sections, particularly above Blackburn. So the hiking itself is really important. And most of the time, if I'm actually out hiking to get the best benefit, it is when I'm by myself in my own head. But the people are definitely, what brought me there, and I wouldn't say it, and in a lot of ways, it's what keeps me there, and quite frankly, if I think about how I've ended up spending first as a volunteer and now as staff, working to protect the AT, it's for the people, it's for the resource, but it's also for the enjoyment of people that I know as well as people I'll never meet. So I don't think you can separate the two. I think all of it makes up the trail.
So in many ways, you got involved in the AT through volunteerism without really know what you were getting into. But how did you become involved in the board, or was that also a generally natural transition?
So what happened was really growing up through the ranks, first at the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club. So eventually what happened was I, kept taking on different officer roles. Then back when in the day when the conference used to have their biennial meeting, I ended up co-hosting with Tom Johnson, Virginia 95, which was when PATC hosted that biennial, and we had about 1,200 folks attend that.
Nice.
And then coming off of that and that responsibility, I then was nominated and elected president of PATC. So I did that, was president 3-4 years, and it was right around the late 1990s. And then because I then was going back to grad school, because I did have a day job as well, so I was headed back to grad school as well as working full time, and just realized that something had to give. So I didn't run for re-election. But that last term as president, I was at a president's meeting that the ATC used to call it. Now it's our Volunteer Leadership Academy. And Marianne Skeen from Georgia was there, and she said, I'd really like for you to consider coming on the board of managers. And I said, I'm finishing grad school. I'm not going to run again. And she said, well, give it a year, and then, when you finish school, really seriously think about it, because I'd like to nominate you. So that's what happened. So then she nominated me to the board of managers. And then I was there, and so I was actually there through the period where we voted ourselves out of a job. I always say rather proudly, actually. And then the conference became the Conservancy. And then I went off the board. I was on the first Stewardship Council. I came back as a committee chair with their Fundraising and Development Committee. And then eventually, somehow, sometimes it's just I don't sit down fast enough when people...
I guess somebody probably says, everybody put your hands in the air, and you're the last one to put it down, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly.
That could be the issue.
So somehow I found myself back on the board. And,
so you were on the board then when Ron Tipton was chair?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you were on the board when Suzanne was chair as well?
Yes.
And so you felt... And I must tell listeners that Sandi very graciously spent some time with the Appalachian Trail Club of Florida. Yes, there is one, and she asked us some of these things. But so you were there when all that, when Suzanne then left, mm-hmm. and then you stepped forward, or that they voted you forward, or were you looking for a new challenge by then?
No, I was not looking for a challenge at all. I had been kind of semi-retired. Chris had completely retired. We both left our full-time employment at the end of 2014. And so 2015 and 2016, we had done some traveling in the winters. We spent a couple winters in Puerto Rico, which was very nice. And then we ended up being the full-time caretakers at the Blackburn Trail Center for 2 hiking seasons. So nice. In 2015 and 2016, we lived up there full-time. And then I came back and we bought the house in Harpers Ferry, and I just started consulting. So I was really doing well. It had been a couple of years. I'd really built up my business. What happened was, when we went through the process with Suzanne leaving, one of the board members put my name forward with no discussion with me. And
that's the way it always works.
Yeah. And, and I stepped back for a minute. I had a long conversation with Chris and a few other folks whose counsel I really trust. I will say my husband, more than anyone, felt pretty immediately and pretty strongly that it was the right thing for me to do for the trail and for ATC. It wasn't really about us and what we were doing or what our plans were necessarily. So I took on the challenge. Yeah. So that's how I ended up.
I've interviewed for the show both Ron Tipton and Suzanne in the past, mm-hmm. and each of them had a longer term vision of the goal and the future work of ATC. Since you've been in charge, and forget COVID right now, we're going to come to that in a minute, has the organisation evolved in that thinking under you, or are you looking to do this as did you take this job as a stopgap, or is this you're full in and you're now taking that vision forward yourself? Yeah,
so it's been an evolution. I definitely stepped into the role first. I wasn't calling myself interim. I was from the start saying, I see myself as being here to help with the transition into whatever is next. But a lot of things have happened in the last year. Some of it have been kind of walking through these crises and seeing how the team has coalesced around them. And then some of it is just I've been able in a really short amount of time to bring on some incredibly talented new folks that have really rounded out the senior team that I'm working with now. So yeah, I'm not planning on going. So the board, we actually have our annual meeting this Saturday. So
All right.
I'm not sure when this radio show is going to go
Next
public.
week, next
Okay,
Thursday.
well, that's fine then, because I really do need to say that it's not official till, well, it's official. The board had the discussion at the end of last month, but we're not going to be officially announcing the fact that I'm going to be staying on full time in this position
Right.
until Saturday at the meeting, and the chair of the board is going to make that announcement then.
Okay.
So you've kind of got a scoop, but please don't let the cat out of the
It
bag.
won't be out till next Thursday. So now your feet are under the desk, and you have the ability, I presume, and the support of your board, because they're going to make an announcement, to have your plans. So where do you think the ATC will be in 10 years' time?
So, I mean, I think one thing that probably sets me apart, even from Ron, who has certainly had a long history overall with the AT, founder of OLDA. I mean, he spent his life as well working for the AT in some form or fashion, but he had really, from a hands-on, even at the volunteer level, been away from ATC for a while. And Suzanne really came in from the outside.
Sure.
In a lot of ways, even as the chair of the board, I was definitely clear in my mind about what I saw as the potential for the organization, and certainly worked with both Ron and Suzanne in sharing in their vision as well as sharing my own.
Do they differ much?
I don't think so. I think that one of the things that I bring that's somewhat unique is, one is I grew up in it, right? So I'm 61 years old. I started when I was 26. I mean, so I've grown up in the trail, on the trail, with the trail, and with the organizations that manage it. So I think that brings a certain perspective. That being said, as much as I have good roots and a good grasp on the past, I've always been, just by nature, a forward thinker. So
Sure.
I really worked with Brian Fitzgerald when he was chair of the board of managers, and we were going from conference to conservancy, which was a huge shift for the organization. But, I fully supported that vision and worked to do what I could to help make that a reality. So I think that the fact that I have respect and understanding of our past, but I do have a clear, we have to stay forward momentum, especially for an organization that's going to be 100 years old in 2025.
Wow. Yes, of course.
I
That's
know.
amazing.
It's amazing, right? And next year is 100 years of Benton Mackay's publishing of his paper. So the vision is 100 years old next year. The organization, and Myron Avery, who I have to tell you, as much as I thoroughly embrace and love Mackay and what went into that vision, I'm under no illusion that the trail would not exist if it wasn't for Myron Avery. And both Chris and I have always said, as much as we can philosophically get into the vision, both of our personalities lends ourselves more to Myron's approach of, at the end of the day, if you don't have that path on the ground, the best ideas in the world,
Yeah,
right?
it doesn't matter. Yes, right. You got to get it done. Yeah.
You got to get the work done.
So the question being, where do you think it's going to be in 10 years? Is it your vision now, or is it continuation of another vision, or is it the board's vision?
I think it's all of the above. I think that it's primarily the staff that, especially our conservation staff, have really, and they held the organization together even when we were going through rough transitions, have always been very clear in where the priorities lie. We have just approved a new strategic plan, which we'll be unveiling on Saturday as well at the annual meeting. The primary goals are...
Can you share any of that? I promise you I won't tell anybody.
Well, no, that's fine. I mean, we just, that's not quite a secret. We're giving a few folks, but really there's three key tenets to our to the plan. It's landscape, it's community, and it's really just tying everything that we do back to the mission of the organization. And then in addition to that, there's some fundamental work that needs to be done to ensure that we have enough resources and capacity, and that we are communicating in the most efficient and effective manner of what it is we're trying to do so that we continue to bring people in. And the last piece, and this is also something that was already well underway for us, and really was a continuation of the first plan, revolves around what we see as our role in justice and equity, diversity and inclusion. And we see that that is a tenet and a value that has to pervade every aspect of what we do, and a lens through which all the work that we do it needs to be, kind of gauged.
Interestingly, when I spoke to, I was either Susanna or Ron, I don't remember which, I'd looked into your website and seen that some of your boards or groups lower down below was becoming more and more diverse the lower it went. I presume some of the diversity is coming through now, because it is a thing that I've noticed over the years just isn't there on the trail right now. So if it became part of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, that might mean it would be more on the trail as well. It will naturally, I'm sure, there will be more Black and Latino and Asian people out on the trail, which is great as far as I'm concerned. I love all that. I love that.
Yeah, no, and we definitely see that a big part of our work initially has to be, looking inward before we can start looking outward. Sure. Because we have to model the behavior that we're looking for. So we're doing a lot, and we have a lot more to do to expand diversity on our board and on our staff, look at our hiring practices, look at our recruitment practices in all of our volunteer leadership councils, and starting to, we have a volunteer leadership academy coming up this month with all of our clubs, and one of the tracks for that academy will be talking to the clubs about how they too can look to increase diversity in their ranks.
That's great. So that's all up and coming. So let's talk about this dreadful year. When did you, or did the ATC first get an inkling that some decisions needed to be made with regard to closures?
So we were pretty much early in the fight. It was early days when we figured this out. It was actually, I remember March 13th was the day I left the office, and that was the last day we had the office open.
Wow.
Yeah. So what happened, and it was even the week or two before that when things started kind of just going south. It was, hitting California in the west, and then New York City was starting to report out cases. And we came together and pretty quickly realized that this was going to be, we weren't sure what it was going to be, but we knew it was something. And we had that weekend of March, we had scheduled our regional partnership committee meetings, which usually entail 40, 50 people of club volunteers within each of the regions. Medium age is in their 60s, right? So right at the sweet spot of what, at least early days, everyone was saying, the most vulnerable.
Sure.
So we made the decision the beginning of that week to move those meetings virtually. So within 4 days, staff completely and volunteers completely reconfigured everything they planned and successfully carried out these meetings virtually before any of us really knew what that looked like. I mean, now we've got an old hat at it, but in those days, in March, it was It
feels that way, though, doesn't
yeah,
it?
doesn't it? It feels like years ago.
So much has happened. Our entire world has turned upside down. The way in which we communicate with each other. I'm just aware of it. I go for a walk every morning. I'm aware of it when people go past. My girlfriend said this morning, she holds her breath when she's walking towards somebody. I kind of understand it. People are jogging and they're breathing and the whole 9 yards. It's just a different world. But sorry, Karen. Yeah.
So no, that's fine. So we did that. The other thing that I kind of realized very early, in fact, that first week as well, is that the Park Service was going to start trying to figure things out as well. But I had a sense that they were going to be scrambling for a while in just getting themselves together. I mean, it's a bureaucracy in the best of times, and the Park Service is not necessarily in the best of times right now. And that there was not really any clear leadership among trails. Because, I mean, it's one thing for a square park to just be able to close the gate, but we don't have, and none of our trails have that luxury.
Sure.
So I convened a call of leaders of national trails across the country. So Pacific Crest Trail, Continental Divide, and ATC, as well as Ice Age Trail and North Country and Northwest Trail.
That was critical.
Arizona.
As far as I could see, that was critical.
Yeah, and so we all came together. There were already a few groups that had started even before us in putting out some good guidance. So we weren't having to reinvent the wheel. We could just start immediately sharing resources with each other, sharing concerns. We pretty much, the 3 long distance trails, we were all on the same page, independent of each other, that we were going to have to sooner than later put out guidance to our long distance hikers, right? Our through hikers and long distance section hikers, because there was just no way that any of us could envision keeping themselves safe and being able to just follow basic hygiene, keeping the communities that they would be in and out of safe. So we all came out around the same time with recommendations to our through hikers to either, not start or leave the trail if they have. Unfortunately, the AT was the furthest along, right? Because our season starts the earliest. CDT hadn't even considered starting yet, and PCT was just on the edge as well because they were still under snow back then. And I think all of us sort of thought, well, okay, but we can still say folks can get out there and enjoy the resource without recognizing what it meant when millions of people were suddenly out of work and school. And within a week or so, by the end of March, beginning of April, and at that point too, we were having multiple calls a week, not just with other trails, but also with our state and federal partners. And everybody was reporting in about record numbers of visitors, parking lots overflowing, communities just being inundated, private property, people parking on highways and private property. And it was insane. So in working with Wendy Jansen, the superintendent of APA, as well as particularly Pennsylvania state folks, they were getting hit really hard. We did then come out with a recommendation asking everyone, and this is when we were supposed to be in national quarantine anyway. So we asked everyone to, stay home.
By the way, listeners, she made a face then, by the way.
Sorry, yeah.
This doesn't work on audio, but we were supposed to be in national quarantine.
Sorry, I know.
There was a face. There was a rolling of the eyes.
Because I would see folks in my hometown coming in with Maryland and Virginia plates, and they'd be, trying to park somewhere and saying, well, we want to go walking, and can't we go walking? And I said, well, why are you even here? Well, I said, those states were in full lockdown at that point. And I'm like, and we're a little town. We were getting really, our town suffered as much as the other towns as far as just getting slammed on the weekends with folks coming from all over.
I'm sure. There were no right answers to any of this. I've got every sympathy with your decision making generally this year, because you were bound to piss off one side or the other. There was no way you can keep everybody happy. Yeah. Has the board throughout this been unanimous in its support of the decisions? And did you take outside counsel? And you said you spoke to the other trails.
Sure.
Did the government get involved at all?
Oh yeah, we had a standing call every week with our the national park and all of our forest district chief rangers. Really, that just stopped in June maybe, and we were trying, because the other part that we were trying really hard to do is keep get the best information, the most up-to-date information up on our website as quickly as possible. Sure. So, because again, contrary to what some people think, ATC in and of itself, we can't close the trail, and actually the trail was never closed. However,
it was guidance. It was and your problem is you have to give the guidance. You don't have the teeth to enforce it.
Yeah,
and that's tough. And we've had people. I had a guest on my show who wrote to me. I invited her on the show because she criticised me wildly about interviewing hikers who are on the trail. But my feeling is if they're out there, they've got a story to tell. You know,
Yeah.
and I don't see there's any validity about that at all. And really, the ATC has received quite a battering, along with a lot of support on social media. So it's worked both ways. Do you think your communication could have been better?
Well, there's times where you think you could have communicated better, and there's times where you have to just accept that you communicated the best you did, and mostly people are upset because they didn't like what you said.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So I feel that we actually did, considering that, this was first time out of the gate, right? It's not like we had practiced how to handle ourselves during a pandemic. So we didn't have a playbook to go by. No one has.
No.
So I really think, quite frankly, that particularly the communication staff of ATC just did an incredible job. Our website was completely up to date all the time. Jurisdictions would call us to check in on other, partner jurisdictions closures because they knew that we had the most up to date information, as did multiple news outlets, just because they knew if they wanted to know what sections were open or closed within their forests or state parks, ATC had that information if it was connected to the AT.
Right.
What I do think is that people didn't like what we had to say.
It happens. By the way, as a side note, I've often offered the ATC a platform to come on the show as often as they wish. They come on.
Great.
You can have a 5-minute section or 10-minute section every week if you like. You can do whatever you like because we get nearly 40,000 downloads a month. So at least we've got an audience.
I know.
Got an audience who will at least listen. So if you ever want to do that, please, you only have to call me, or Jordan calls me,
Great.
or anybody calls me. I'll be happy to do that. So you made these decisions, and so and I know that you decided not to recognise through hikes for 2020.
Yeah.
For me, that is horrendous. Personally,
Okay.
I've got 2 of those certificates now. I treasure them. I absolutely treasure them. And I think actually, I know nobody does it for a certificate, but it's a recognition. And I would say that 2020 for some of these hikers has been the toughest year to hike at all. Do you still think that was a correct decision? Because, after all, many people didn't get off the trail and quite a few have made it to the end and many others still do.
Right.
So what do you think about that?
Sure. So, Lori Pottinger, who I'm sure you know of.
Very well.
Lori Pottinger.
She hiked with me last year for a day.
We were having this discussion not that long ago, and because, again, contrary to, I think, social media take, I am a nice person. I do care about people, and I care about what people think. And she said to me, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to acknowledge all the people who followed our guidance?
Exactly what I think, by the way.
And I said, you're right. And so at some point, this was what we asked. I still contend, and it's not my place. I recognize it's not AT's place to be, the conscience of the trail necessarily, but I do feel that we have, if anyone gets to play that role, I think we've earned our stripes for that.
There's a place you fill, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that just as far as being good citizens and being part of what we all are collectively going through, and I got hit pretty hard as well about a column that I did, and there maybe I could have said a sentence slightly differently to clarify.
That would have pissed off a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah, but I talked about this idea of that being able to stay hiking even in the middle of this, there is a certain privilege associated with that, and that there were people that literally. Folks wrote to me or wrote to ATC and they said, well, I quit my job and I spent my money. And I'm like, you're right. It's terrible. And COVID is really wreaking havoc with the entire world. But there's also, single parents and 2 household parents and families and that have lost their entire livelihood, that are being evicted from their apartments. There's people that are dying daily.
A sense of perspective is probably sometimes important.
I understand that you made a sacrifice and now you're having to make yet another one, but we didn't bring COVID in. It's almost like ATC was like, well, this is your fault. It's like, no. this is the virus's fault. So you can go blame the virus if you want, but we're all in this together. And I
But what
felt
about
like
the
that was important.
southbounder who started after restrictions were lifted, or I'm not even sure. See, that's the problem. I don't actually know where we are right now. What is this current state of play?
Yeah, so a few things there too. I mean, one is, we had people both north and southbounders illegally summiting Katahdin because it didn't open till July.
Yeah, I know.
So there was still some of those issues.
Sure.
There's still, and unless this has been lifted, but at least last I know that like Maine and Connecticut were having, mandatory 14-day quarantines for folks coming from out of state. So there's still these things percolating out there, right? If you look at the COVID maps, and you look at the hotspots, regardless of what folks are saying, like, well, I don't know of anybody that's sick, or it's only in the cities. Well, that's not true. And in fact, the Washington Post just had how much rural Southern Virginia is just getting slammed right now with COVID.
Yeah.
And, well, I don't have it. Well, you don't know that. We don't know that.
Yeah, that's true.
There can be these super carriers. Everyone's talking about it where you have no symptoms, but you're actually, actively contagious for who knows how long.
Absolutely.
No one knows anything yet.
I agree. And I suppose the question about the southbounder was leading to my last question about this was really, why not just give an amnesty? I mean, I know people don't like the word amnesty, but this has been a tough year for everyone. They've done it. Some have done it. Some haven't done it. And this has always been on the honour system, hasn't it? As a member of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, I'd like you to put that to the board this week.
Okay.
Because half the people will be saying, no way. And the other I'll be saying, oh, great.
Yeah. No. I think there's instances when folks, have made significant sacrifice or been unfairly treated to such an extent that amnesty fits in. I'm not sure this is the one you think. This is the one. Yeah.
Now, so what about the trail maintainers? Because I know the average age is my age, 67, or 66 or 67, something like that. Yeah. I would think, given that, they're amazing trail benefactors, they really are. And I imagine it was difficult to pull the trigger on when they could return to work, wasn't it? Because they're still very, very exposed.
But they were great. And I mean, I can't say enough about, and trust me, they were just as unhappy, if not more so in some ways, than the hikers. So believe me, but they, it's this really weird cooperative management system that exists that protects and manages the AT. And from the outside, anyone that looks at it just, from 30,000 feet would say, how in the world could that possibly work, right? You've got these feds and you've got private entities and you've got these 31 individual nonprofits, and everyone kind of has to rely on honor system and mutual respect and cooperation. But the clubs recognize that is the system in which they exist as well. And so they weren't happy about it, but they respected the restrictions that we put on. There was some concern, some of it was actually coming from the federal government as it related to their ability to provide insurance. So volunteers in the park in particular.
Of course, yeah.
So, Wendy did have authority to be saying, kind of open the trail back up to workers. It was really ultimately Wendy's call as a superintendent. But they work within our guidance. I know, just anecdotally through PATC My Club that, and my husband's a big volunteer, but I know that he's gotten information on having to go out to our website. We have a safety video there that he watched and then signed off that he had watched it. They are managing the size of their crews. They're making sure that everyone is safe and following the protocols. And they're doing just, yeoman's job.
It is absolutely yeoman's work. It absolutely is,
because there was a lot to catch up with, right?
I would imagine,
prep season was completely lost, particularly in the Mid-Atlantic. And we had kind of warm, rainy weather, the kind of stuff that just makes the weeds explode. I know that there was a couple folks out just a couple weeks ago And I think they took out 20 blowdowns in one day just on the
Wow.
section of trail that they walked.
Have animals come back in a significant way, or has that not been the same?
Yeah, I think in a way that, and it's, I mean, I haven't gotten like reports if there's more bear and deer, but we were definitely just seeing, that in some ways the animals were happy, kind of not seeing quite so many folks out when things quieted down for a while.
I think that's wonderful. They must have had a flipping great party there. Must be great. Look, I've got two more questions. I really appreciate being so gracious with your time. What plans are you making for next year's trail season? Because I expect there could be even bigger numbers out there. Are you thinking about how that may impact the trail?
One of the things we just finished up was taking a survey of everyone who had registered at least this year through AT Camp, which is our voluntary registration system that starts out in Georgia. So we are starting to collect data from there as to who is anticipating starting next year, and are they going to start at the beginning again or start where they got off, and flip-flopping. So trying to start to collect data there. I know we just have raw data at this point, so we haven't really analyzed it yet. I mean, the other part of this, and everyone keeps asking me this, including board members I might have. I have a board member that was out on the trail, had started through hiking, and he came off when we issued the guidance.
That might be pretty poor if you hadn't.
He wants to ask me, what about next year? I wish I had a crystal ball, but I have no idea. It's COVID, right? It's 2020.
Yes, you're right. Life changed. The rules have been rewritten. I entirely understand it. And so what has the organisation and you, what have you learned about yourself as an organisation, and what have you learned about yourself this year?
So as an organization, I think that we've learned we are incredibly resilient and strong, and that even going through kind of personal trauma as an organization through this transition late last year, because it was just a year in July that I started.
Sure.
And then walking into March of this year and not only kind of surviving, but in many ways we're thriving. I mean, I think our teams, weirdly, even though we're virtual, we're probably more close than we were before because we're more in communication with each other on a continual basis. Instead of when we were just kind of on a phone and not seeing their faces. I think that we've found that even with everyone being upset, the cooperative management system is alive and well and thriving. I mean, we all came together as partners at the table, figuring it out together. Even if we got upset with each other, forgiving each other and moving on, and keeping, our eye on that the trail is ultimately, that's what we're all here for, right? We're all here for the same reason at the end. So I think that's what we learned as an organization. Personally, I really am proud. I feel that what I found when I came in the door last year to where we are now is really a full 180. I'm incredibly proud and just so thankful for the employees of ATC who, from senior staff on down, going through that kind of trauma last year, I wouldn't have blamed anyone who said, you know what, I think I need to go somewhere else. And, but their commitment to the trail and their trust in, I think, the board overall too, they've stayed. And so nothing that we've accomplished would have been possible without that. And so I'm just really proud and learned about my, that I didn't think I wanted to go back to work again, but I guess I've in some way, whether I knew it or not, had been preparing myself for this most of my life. And at least right now, I feel like I'm doing some good. So I'm really enjoying it.
Well, I thank you so much for your time today, and I really appreciate you joining. So I'd like to leave you just with two thoughts, though. One, I think you should still be considering a through hike. You're the same age as I was when I did my first one, and I went again. That's one thing. The other thing is, if you ever consider it, think about taking a spot on the podcast. And anytime you want to be on it, or any of your people, they want to announce anything, I'm very happy to get you on the show, okay?
Yeah. Now, Steve, I will say I have been section hiking. I have about close to 1,300 miles under my belt. So I
Only
want you to know I'm
only
not.
900 to go then.
I don't have to do the whole thing. But I will tell you, once I became chair, and certainly now in this job, the one thing that I find I never have time for is to go hiking.
There you go. There you go. Well, thanks for all that you do, and thanks for coming. I really appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks. I appreciate it as well.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.
What a great record of service to the community Sandi has behind her. And when you listen to what she has to say, even if you disagree with how she and the ATC went about the trail closures, hope that you consider what a thankless task it must have been to run the organisation this year. Sandi makes a positive out of what could very well have been a negative, and I admire her greatly for that. She didn't have to do this, but she stepped up for the community and took the hard decisions. For myself, I'm glad that we had such a clear-sighted, focused individual at the helm this year. Our community is lucky to have her. Now, I know that some of you have also disagreed with me following 2020 hikers on the trail, and I respect your views, but I see this platform as somewhere to tell those stories, and we're going to tell another one now. Mr. President has moved into everyone's favourite state. Yes, it's Pennsylvania. And Bill is getting the worst part out of the way first, as he's heading south. Here's Mr. President. We're back on with Bill. Hi, Bill. How are you?
I'm good, Blue. How are you?
I'm better now. We've worked out how to make this phone call. so we texted earlier, and it's 8:30 in the morning on Wednesday morning, which is the day before this show goes out. And you said, let me find somewhere to sit down. So you're actually on the trail right now?
I am. I'm on the trail. My little campsite in Pennsylvania.
Nice.
With Zippy and Bad Bunny, actually.
Hang on, we'll come back to them in a minute. But how is it? You had to find somewhere to sit down because there's always rocks there. so what was the problem with that?
the rocks, Blue. Oh man, the warnings were all correct. There are many rocks on trail, and I will tell you, I've been thinking a lot about the rocks because they're not all the same. No. You know, you've got these little rocks that they don't move, but they're really sharp and they hurt your feet, and there's no way to step properly on them. Yeah. You've got big rocks that look stable but actually move when you step on them. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, and
it's a test.
I will say that even though, it is a test, and I'm very happy to have new shoes.
I bet.
For this test.
And the worst thing, what I found about. There are certain states where there's still a lot of rocks and you have to step on them, but they're these are quite sharp rocks, aren't they, in a lot of cases? And you can't avoid some of them. You have to put your foot down somewhere, don't you?
Yeah, and it's really quite annoying because sometimes they're really, really sharp, and it's kind of like you can feel it in your foot through your shoe.
Yeah, I know. Are you damaging your new shoes already, or how are you doing with them?
The shoes are good. The only I've had is that they're actually, when you get new shoes, the bottom kind of they're very tacky and very grippy. Right. And because of that, I actually had a fall yesterday, which was unfortunate.
Well, what happened?
There was a blowdown over the trail, and I stepped up with my left foot, kind of propelled myself over it, and my right foot caught on the tree, and I went flying face first down on the ground. My face didn't hit first. Luckily, my hand caught it, but my hand hit really hard, and the palm of it.
Oh, that can hurt. That
can
most
really
of the
day.
Hurt. Yeah, that can really hurt as well, can't it? Oh, yeah. And I fell a lot of times in Pennsylvania, and I got a lot of gritty stuff and stones in my hand and in my shoulder, my elbows and things like that. And it's difficult to clean out some of it as well. So you say you met back up with Bad Bunny and Zippy. So how did that happen?
Oh, it was great. So this is a good story. They've been behind me by just a few miles for a while. I hadn't seen them since late July, which happens in the trail, Yes. And I get to this, I was near Branchville, New Jersey, and we arranged. I got off trail to kind of spend the day with my fraternity brother, and it allowed Bad Bunny and Zippy to catch up. And we met at this deli, the Appalachian Deli. You probably have heard of.
You've sent me the picture. I don't recall it myself on my journey, but you sent me the picture.
Well, I have to give a shout out because the owner of this deli, first off, he was listening to your podcast when we walked in.
I'm definitely going to put his picture in the show notes then. What's his name?
I have to, because he's such a great guy. And I think his name's John.
John. Okay. Hi, John.
Yeah, I believe so. And he was the nicest guy. He makes the most amazing grilled bagel with cream cheese.
Ooh.
We packed out like several of them.
Wow.
And he just was so thrilled. He's like, he heard Zippy and Bad Bunny talking because they got there first. And he heard them talking about Mr. President. And he said, "Oh my God, the Mr. President." And I walk in, I felt like a celebrity, Blue.
How about that? It's fun. I was saying to my girlfriend this morning that it's really funny that last year on the trail, I learned two things. One, how many people knew me on the trail because of the podcast, and two, how many people didn't know me on the trail because of the podcast. Because the reason being, I thought we get quite an audience, but there's a hell of a lot of people who don't listen to it. So the fact that you've bumped into somebody who was listening to it, I love that. I got to tell you.
Oh, it was really cool, and it couldn't have been a nicer person too. So
that's nice. So you're now hiking with Bad Bunny and Zippy, are you?
Yeah, and it's just so great because I miss them a lot. They're just fantastic people.
Are they the two?
And a joy to hike with.
Is that the two ladies
the two
that were in the picture? They're siblings, are they? I didn't know that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, they are. And I don't know if you remember this, Blue, but I told you that I couldn't tell you the story of how Zippy got her name unless I asked her.
That's right.
I asked her. She said it's okay. I can tell you the story if you want to hear it.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So yeah, it's not a long story. Zippy and Bad Bunny are determined to finish this trail, and they'll do anything it takes to get to make it. And as you start hiking, your metabolism increases, and you go to bed at night, and you wake up. Sometimes you have to use the restroom, and there isn't a restroom, and you don't have time to make it to one.
Oh,
so,
no. Oh, dear.
Zippy was pretty resourceful. She's very resourceful, and she used what she had on hand. She didn't have a Gatorade bottle. She didn't have, Tango, if you remember, had told her that he had to use a Sawyer squeeze bottle once.
Yeah. Yeah. I've done that. I did that a lot of the time, I'll tell you.
Yeah, well, you might gotta make sure you clean that before you.
Yeah. I never used it for water.
But, Zippy, she used a Ziploc bag, like a freezer Ziploc bag, and she did what she had to do.
There you go. That's okay. One thing I think you learn about yourself on the trail, I'm sure you've learned it yourself in other hiking you've done. You learn how resourceful you can be, don't you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And what I love about this trail name is, if you hear Zippy, you don't think pee in a Ziploc bag,
well,
right?
I will now.
No, she's fat. Or she's Zippy, but really it's about peeing in a Ziploc bag.
Nice, very nice, Tim. Well, thank you for sharing that on the show. Now, you also mentioned in your text earlier that you've stayed at a rooster-themed Airbnb, which has got to be said, that sounds unusual to me.
It was, and I'll tell you, this is interesting because Zippy and Bad Bunny went to their own place to rest that night. They went a little further than me. They went to a nudist colony, which ended up being a weird choice because it turned out it was really cold in the morning.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, not the best time to go to a nudist colony. They actually had to wear clothes.
Yeah.
So, and I went to I had pre-planned a stay at this Airbnb, which I had no idea what it was going to be like, near Danielsville.
Right.
And I get there, I've never seen so many roosters in my life. Metal roosters, pictures of roosters, rooster pillows, rooster calendars. It was intense.
And weird.
The lady barber who owned. Oh yeah. But I will say, it was a very nice place to stay.
It's funny actually.
She took me to get McDonald's.
Certainly, I don't think when I first went in 2014, Airbnb was around, but we had a couple of Airbnbs. Maybe it's only one, maybe it's two last year. I know a lot of people were doing Airbnbs as well. Have you found many of the hikers this year doing it?
Not really. The thing about it is, this Airbnb was listed in Guthooks, so that's how I found it.
Nice.
Otherwise, I wouldn't normally go search for an Airbnb because I think an Airbnb host doesn't think about hikers as their typical guest.
No, I think if they know how we live, they wouldn't want them as their guest either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
it's nice. And you also mentioned that Delaware Water Gap. You thought it was a great trail town. I didn't really stay in it much. I actually stayed with one of our listeners, funnily enough, and it was lovely, and we had a great time there, Trigger and I. But as a town, what did you do in the town?
Yeah. So in Delaware Water Gap, there was a ramen place, there was a barbecue place, there was a pie place, there was a pizza place. There was so much great food. There's an ice cream parlor, and it's all basically right on the trail, which is fantastic.
I don't recall that, funnily enough, but yeah, great. I mean, and once again, it's how you find a place, it's not how anybody else finds a place, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would definitely go there again.
Yeah, cool. Now, we're going to have to cut this a little bit short because I'm really struggling to catch you. This is going to take a lot of editing, this show, let me tell you, or this particular conversation, but I'll work it out. So what's the plan now? So where are you right now? Have you gone through the worst of the rocks, or you still got some of the bad rocks to go?
Well, Blue, I'm going to tell myself I've gotten to the worst of the rocks, even if I haven't, because I don't know.
How far are you from Delaware? Well, how far are you into it then?
We're 50 miles from Delaware Water Gap. So we're about 25 miles from Port Clinton.
Yeah, Port Clinton is really where it starts. Is Port Clinton? I'm trying to think whether Port Clinton's before or after Duncannon for you. I think Port Clinton's after Duncan. It starts after.
You still haven't figured out the southbound route.
No, exactly. Which sounds pretty pathetic. I think Duncannon is where it starts. Coming out of Duncannon was pretty bad, but coming out of Port Clinton pretty tough. And going downhill into Port Clinton is going to be tough as well. But that's all part of the thing. And you've still got some rocks. The good news is you've still got some rocks to go.
Well, this wouldn't be a podcast with you, Blue, if you didn't give me some kind of warning before we end.
There you go. Okay, man. Well, look, lovely to catch up with you. We'll end it now, and we'll catch up again this week. I'm going to put in your picture of Bad Bunny, Zibby, and John. We think it's John. Hi, John. And I'll catch up with you next week, okay?
Great. Thanks, Blue.
Take it easy. Bye.
Take care.
I must say, Bill is always a positive bloke, and he took our lousy connection in his stride. Mind you, what you heard only partly reflects our conversation. I had to edit the dickens out of that, but I think he got the drift. As usual now, I want to thank the donors who stepped up this week with a terrific donation from Christine Vush-Collins, who let me know that her name is pronounced Vush-Collins, and my Dana, who's a monthly donor. Dana the donor. Christine wrote the following. Thanks for mentioning in episode number 235 that you can donate with either PayPal or credit card. I didn't realise you needed to click the PayPal button before the option to pay by credit card appears. So now you'll know. Click on the PayPal button on my hikingradionetwork.com site and you'll have an option to pay either a one-off or monthly donation with either your PayPal account or your own credit card. Thank you so much for pointing that out, Christine. I'm sure many others have had the same problem. Now, how about this for something so exciting? I can't tell you. One listener, Don Robinson, reached out to me via email 10 days ago and asked for my new address. He wanted to send me something. I didn't think much more about it until about 4 days ago. And I got a package at home. It was a long, cylindrical kind of box. You know, the sort that they put maps in. Oh my God. You should have seen this. It was a map of the AT, which is 2 feet high and 10 feet long. It is gorgeous. Well, since then, I've been communicating with Don and the producer of the map. These maps are produced by Larry Knight, himself a 2,000 miler, known also on the trail as a MacGyver. I invited Larry onto the show to talk about not only his own AT hike, but also these incredible maps. You can check them out at Red Eft Mapping. It's Red Eft, E-F-T, mapping.com, and I'll put the link in the show notes. But even more exciting was that Larry offered to do a customised map for my own hikes, and you really need to check these out on the site. He offered to swap out the one that Don had sent me, and yes, I did check with Don to see if that would be okay. He said yes, by the way. Even better, Larry said that I could use the map I already had to give away to a listener in a little competition when he's on the show. I promise you, you are going to be absolutely blown away by these maps, and I'll be sharing more information in the coming weeks. Finally today, Fozzie comes across a hiker in distress, and as a fellow Brit, I was proud of how he responded. I'll see you next week. Chapter 8, Trail Days. May the 17th to May the 31st, mile 620 to 800. The Plaza Motel in Petersburg wasn't busy, but the car rental businesses were. I made several calls in vain to secure transport for me and Lasagna to Damascus, 100 miles south. Frustrated, we placed our packs on the verge and stuck out a thumb. I made sure my pack was visible when hitching, advertising I was a thru hiker and not a serial killer. Butch Simpkins pulled over a mere 5 minutes later and took us an hour to Wytheville, dropping us at a gas station. I'd barely started my coffee before Steve and Annie Chambers pulled up and took us to Damascus. It couldn't have been easier. The place, where we stayed before, was full. We pitched tents on the grounds before Daffy arrived and beckoned us to Tent City. At the far end of town, a field and the surrounding woods housed hundreds of hikers, with the necessary amenities for them. The police milled around conspicuously. Food stalls plied their trade as a steady queue of hikers kept them solvent. Equipment manufacturers extolled their latest products, and after meeting Ron Bell, owner of Mountain Laurel Designs, I left with one of his spirit quilts. I liked its simplicity over restricting sleeping bags. I chatted with Tom Hennessy, owner of Hennessy Hammocks, before returning to the woods to sling my new hammock under Lasagna and Daffy's guidance. With my recent purchases, I hoped to improve my sleep. A local church offered free medical checkups. After deeming my blood pressure excellent, they cleaned a wound on my leg, the result of overzealous mosquito bite scratching in the middle of the night. They washed and massaged my feet and even supplied coffee and cake. Foot rubs and an espresso held much potential. I was delighted to bump into some PCT hikers I'd met on my thru hike. Detective Bubbles, Karma and Wiffle Chicken came over to say hello, and Stanimal surprised me in the diner. Scott Squatch Harriet, who had produced several PCT films, advertised his latest AT effort, Flip Flop Flippin', filmed the year before. Flip Flop Flippin' 2 was his current work in progress. We parted with plans to meet on trail. The hammock was so comfortable, I woke in the same position I'd fallen asleep. I hoped my erratic sleep patterns were over. Daffy, Lasagna and I dodged an onslaught from the traditional water fight before getting a ride to Petersburg with K2 and Tarpwater, who'd hired a car. They dropped us at the Plaza Motel, and I debated staying a night, but the need for mileage got the better of me. The Earthling and Yodeler let me use their shower. I left alone and made a quick 5 miles to camp. The ensuing days were quiet as hikers stayed in Damascus, and, approaching the 3rd month on the AT, many had dropped out. The majority quit in the first month for various reasons: poor finances, constant blisters, the challenge was greater than expected, or the experience didn't suit them. Daffy and Lasagna had taken 5 days out with relatives, so I hiked alone, albeit with occasional familiar faces. I didn't mind the solitude, I adored it. It surprises people when I thru hike alone. I spend the first 2 weeks socialising to get to know others. I like hiking with those I gel with, but also relish the prospect of time alone. On the PCT, I thrived over one section of the Sierra Nevada, where I met no one for days. Thousands attempt the AT each year, less on the PCT, and CDT hikers only number in the hundreds. Thru hikers can choose company or solitude. We test friendships on thru hikes, and those starting with best friends or partners realise several months in proximity stretches even the closest of alliances, so I start alone. I prefer spending time with those I connect with, but I'm comfortable in solitude. I'm an introvert by nature. Shy as a kid, I only left my shell and gained confidence in my 30s. During my 20s, I suffered depressive episodes connected with social anxiety, and I do now. I hated being the centre of attention, struggled to express myself and hid at home, not venturing out for weeks except to work. I declined social invitations because I couldn't handle them. Introverts get a raw deal. Society pushes extroversion as the preferred choice, but I don't buy it. Their confidence does foster career success, and they flourish socially, thriving in company. Introverts recharge through solitude, drain with social stimulation, and stay in the background. Bill Gates is an introvert, as were Abraham Lincoln, Albert Einstein, and Mahatma Gandhi. The extrovert may command the board meetings and hold court, but it's the quiet ones who often find the grand ideas. I struggled with my introversion, but now I wouldn't change it. My best ideas come when I'm alone, and solitude energizes me. I thrive on it. I'll always escape to the hills, usually midweek when they're quieter, and I recharge, find inspiration, and think clearly. My ability to thrive away from others often reaches extremes. On the AT, I revelled in occasional solitude, but often I escaped further. At day's end, I often took side trails or tramped through the undergrowth to escape. I'd spend a solitary night there, content with my company. During the day, if I craved time alone and heard hikers ahead, I'd rest to let them move on. If I heard people behind, I'd increase my pace. At the end of solitude's spectrum, where I couldn't push the physical world boundaries anymore, I dreamt of scenarios to satisfy my isolation further. I fantasized about the apocalypse, the last days of humankind, a lone survivor drifting through decaying towns, surveying a rotting legacy, crumbling and deteriorating. I wandered freely, a dromomaniac indulging their ultimate fantasy. Through hiking is my escape. It's the only time I'm free to spend months devoid of society's regulations and to live with minimal constraints. Or, to quote James Thurber, 2 is company, 4 is a party, 3 is a crowd, 1 is a wanderer. I crossed the footbridge over the VA 630, forgetting to collect water for camp. The AT climbed 1,300 feet to Bruiser's Knob, and I reached the summit, swallowing harshly, my mouth starved of moisture. I poured a last, warm, pathetic dribble from my water bottle. Shit, Fozzie, why didn't you get water? The afternoon sun blazed as sweat trickled over my face, my shirt dark and sodden with perspiration. I wiped a hand across my forehead and looked at my palm, an oily mess of dirt, sweat, salt and sunscreen. My hair was greasy, matted and smelt, and dirt ingrained my fingernails. A sticky layer of dust covered my legs, interspersed with red, swollen mosquito bites. I checked the guidebook. Sava Hollow shelter nestled, annoyingly, 1/2 mile down a steep hill. The water source was even further, and the next one lay 5 miles distant. My energy sapped, and I didn't need to socialise at the shelter. I wanted to be alone. Begrudgingly, I hoisted my pack and descended. Unfamiliar faces mingled in Sava Hollow, but I recognised and nodded a greeting to Tinkerbell and carried on to collect water. I ascended to the ridge in the sapping heat. Majestic views appeared as I hiked the ridge towards Sinking Creek Mountain. Ominous clouds congregated and rain shadows darkened the lowlands. I glanced to the west and felt a powerful wind approach. The heavens opened and I fled like a wounded animal, searching for a suitable camp spot. The ground sloped, but my hammock could pitch over uneven ground. I searched for the support slings which suspended it, but couldn't find them. Gales tore through the woods. Trees creaked overhead, groaning and battling the fierce wind. I was high and exposed, but the woods tempered the storm. I could get wet and cold, so I acted quickly. I fashioned 2 anchor points between the trees for the fly sheet low to the ground. I'd returned my redundant air pad and instead used a pile of leaves and my empty rucksack for insulation and a modicum of comfort. The fly was perfect for the hammock, but as I cooked my meal, the sides lifted in the gusts and rain worked underneath. I endured an uncomfortable night with a little sleep. Although I stayed dry, stones protruded from the uneven ground, and I shifted constantly. Lifting my pack to clear away, I found the hammock slings underneath. Clouds congregated in the valley below, a vast ocean of mist. Distant ridges surfaced before vanishing like enormous serpents. I descended to Craig Creek Road, passing juggles collecting water by the knee-day shelter. We shared recent news, and he'd heard PJ was taking a month's rest for his stress fracture. I struggled to Cove Mountain onto the jagged, fluctuating ups and downs of a section called the Dragon's Tooth, which tired me. I wasn't progressing well. My speed was slow, albeit hampered by a difficult section, but I felt lethargic, lacking in power. I blamed my lousy night's sleep. The temperature rose as I hiked into summer, and the humidity increased. I didn't mind walking in dry heat. On the PCT it often exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the Californian desert, but without the moisture. The eastern side of the US was a different story, and I struggled with the mugginess. In the mountains, the water sources ran clear and cold. The water quality at the top of the Appalachian hills was excellent. I filtered my drinking water, even from springs. It took little time. Dipping my bottle in a creek, I screwed the filter on and continued, the entire process taking seconds. But as the summer heat intensified, the lower creeks weakened to pathetic dribbles, too shallow to submerge my bottle. To solve the problem, I wedged a leaf in the flow where water dropped vertically, weighted under a stone, and it funneled into my bottle. Often when I stopped at water sources, a leaf had been left by others. I reached McAfee Knob and smiled. The famous rock outcrop, protruding like a diving board, is one of the most photographed sections. Search the internet for Appalachian Trail, and sure enough, McAfee Knob will appear, complete with a hiker sitting on the edge, legs dangling over the precipice. It bustled with day trippers, so I continued, stumbling on the delightfully named Tinker Cliffs, a half-mile section skirting the same precipice, weaving close and toying with the drop. I wondered why it wasn't as popular as McAfee and assumed most tourists wouldn't walk the 7 miles to get there. The view was on par. It was quiet, away from the tourists, so only the occasional thru-hiker passed. Taking advantage of my loose planning approach, despite being only 4 p.m, I slung the hammock near the trail and hung out, so to speak. A cooling breeze lifted from the valley, cooling me as I pushed my trekking pole against the ground to sway the hammock. Passing hikers occasionally yelled greetings, which I either ignored, faking a snore so not to appear rude, or waved a casual arm in lazy recognition. After days of pushing out miles, remaining stationary proved a wonderful tonic to experience one section of trail instead of fleeting glimpses. As the sun lowered, inky skies chased an orange glow over the horizon. Reds joined the celebration, brushed with yellows and skimmed by violets. I swayed my arms, orchestrating the stars. They obliged and joined the symphony. The moon climbed over distant mountains, bathing my world in silver. Increasingly confident, like a child making friends at nursery, its coyness faded as it took command of the sky. I was alone, a solitary hiker, making a small section of the Appalachian Trail my own. My home for the night welcomed me. Daleville, by stark contrast, was the opposite. A glorified pit stop servicing US 81, it epitomized everything I loathed about some freeway towns. The VA 220 carved a line through its collection of fast food restaurants, gas stations and motels. It had everything a thru-hiker needed, but lacked character. I checked into the Howard Johnson Motel, and Juggles arrived in the afternoon as we'd agreed to share a room. It had been 5 days since my last wash. Salt stains streaked my shirt, my shorts blotched with dirt, and debris caught in my sock entwines. A line of dirt around my ankles contrasted with the white skin below the socks, and my white, pasty-looking, wrinkled feet sported ingrained dirt under the toenails. Everything needed washing on laundry day, so I had nothing to wear. You can spot through hikers in the laundrette because they'll either be sweating in Gore-Tex, the only clothing available, or wrapped in a dangerously small towel, sitting cross-legged. I hated showering to get back into laundry clothes, so laundry came first. I sat in the Howard Johnson laundry room in my poncho to the amusement of guests and scanned the singles ads in an obscure local magazine. I imagined my entry. Dirty, smelly, single hiker seeks clean female. Frequents laundrettes, Denny's and anywhere serving decent coffee. Enjoys the latest fashions such as Cuban fibre ponchos and woolen underwear. Subsists on pizza and sleeps in the woods. No fixed abode, emails only please. Dark brown trickles of water slid off me in the shower. My hair needed 3 shampoos before lathering, and within minutes of drying myself, it was so hot I stank again. The damage report highlighted 2 missing toenails, a colony of mosquito bites, a sweat rash circling both ankles, and toe fungus. I contemplated my deterioration whilst pulling grass from my socks. Being filthy on thru hikes is hard, but once accepted, we ignore it. Walking a few hours in summer is enough to make anyone stink, but after 5 days without washing or laundry, the aroma is lethal. We become immune to our stink, as we might forget we're wearing perfume after a while. For reasons unknown, when arriving in town, we can smell it. Our hunger being what it is, restaurants are the first call, where the air conditioning amplifies our stench. We check armpit aromas and invite others to smell as waiting staff point fans in our direction. In fact, the fan speed is proportional to our stink. It's an honour to be the smelliest. The waitress teeters as close as she dares and turns the fan to hurricane mode. There you go, you'll be more comfortable in this cooler air, or perhaps you like a table outside. Chris Juggles Chiappini arrived and repaired his gear on the balcony. He hailed from Midland Park on the outskirts of New York City, and as his trail name suggested, he juggled. Learning his craft from a young age and encouraged by his father, he worked for agencies who found him placements. Albeit a niche trade, there are few jugglers, so he found gigs regularly. I left Daleville gladly. It wasn't unpleasant, more lacking any identity. I returned to the woods and, bar a climb to Full Heart Shelter, hiked easily. With no big elevation changes, the trail floated along between 2,000 and 3,000 feet in a series of short, non-taxing undulations. I chatted with Kaleidoscope and Not Worthy at the Wilson Creek Shelter before continuing. The mosquitoes, or mozzies as I called them, hovered in squadrons and they loved me. Some say they're attracted by our carbon dioxide. Others speculate our body temperature, metabolism, blood type and even clothing colour have an impact. Whatever's responsible, if I'm near mozzies, I get mauled. They weren't prevalent during the hot daytime but fed when it cooled late afternoon and evening. I prayed for a breeze as they couldn't fly and I learnt to seek the ridges or the tree line where I could count on airflow. I relied on the wind. Other methods like repellent I tried and they didn't work. They pounced at camp. I tried eating but a constant droning circled my ear. Between mouthfuls I swiped erratically, becoming frustrated. As their numbers increased, so did my temper. After 30 minutes of depleting patience, I lost my shit, much to the amusement of the others. "Sod off, will you?" I yelled, jumping around camp, slapping my skin. "Sod off! Seriously!" I hated DEET and it rarely worked. Wearing waterproofs had worked in the past, but I only had my poncho. The last resort, and 100% effective, was fleeing to the safety of my hammock. I'd discussed the dilemma with Thirsty and agreed to trial a method we'd both read about. Mozzies don't like garlic, so it made sense to eat it because it's absorbed into the bloodstream and transmitted from the pores. Thirsty claimed it took a week to kick in, so I stocked up in town and added 2 sliced fat cloves to my dinner every evening. Breakfast, however, proved a problem. Garlic complements many foods, but not granola. I love garlic, and the odour doesn't bother me, on or off trail. It doesn't share an affinity with the first meal of the day, especially on an empty stomach. I knew this, but tried it anyway, and my digestive tract revolted. Sitting with coffee in hand, I struggled. I couldn't decide whether to drink coffee and eat granola first to line the stomach, or start with the garlic to get it out of the way, chasing it with food and drink. I chose the former and lined my stomach first. Garlic is tasty chopped and cooking tempers the potency, but raw for breakfast was a shit idea. I chewed, the heat hit first and I sweated. As pungent onion flooded my sinuses, I gagged and my eyes watered. Valiantly I battled, convinced I'd travelled further along the road of insect immunity. My stomach had other ideas and ordered an emergency evacuation. I vomited a mix of dark roast Italian coffee and granola. I felt better, but bemoaned the waste of coffee. The garlic breakfast trial ceased, and I increased my dose at dinner instead. The rhododendrons bloomed, and I entered shaded tunnels awash with pink flowers and sweet scents. It was hot and sticky, albeit bearable in the mountains. The Appalachians shone green, the plants grew vigorously, and the trees wore new coats, sheltering me from the sun. I remember Daffy talking about the stark landscape of post-winter. "Don't worry, Fozzie, give it time, and it'll be a damn jungle out there." He was right. Plants encroached onto narrowing trails, and I dodged poison ivy, ducked under branches, and squeezed through overgrown sections. I respected the woods, and they looked after me, providing shade, shielding me from the wind, and I stayed dry in light showers. I drank cool water and ate wild food. Pools offered the chance to wash, and each night 2 stout trees held my hammock aloft. Fires granted heat for colder nights, and smoke to deter the insects. Sand from creek beds cleaned my pot and washed my hands. When society collapses, I'll pack my rucksack and run for the woods. It was May the 28th. I'd been on trail for 59 days, covering 745 miles. Slow progress, but expected after my successful anti-blister plan. My low mileage days had worked. Hard skin covered the soles of my feet, their way of adapting to the wear and tear. Later, the skin became so hard and calloused I could tap it. Now on full throttle and fighting fit, I made inroads into the mileage deficit. 25-mile days were normal and 30s common. I passed under the guillotine, a boulder that was wedged between 2 vertical rock slabs, and descended 3,412 feet to the James River, crossing the longest pedestrian-only bridge on the AT. Crossing the VA 130, the 2,700-foot climb to Bluff Mountain proved easier than expected. I passed Dayglow, Slim and Sun, and as the temperature soared, I drank water and replenished my electrolytes regularly. A clear cut provided majestic views as the mountain fell to the lowlands, dotted with rivers and towns. I leant against a rock, glancing to one side as a hiker caught my eye. I waved. "Hey, how's it going?" He glanced over but said nothing. "Hey," I repeated. "You doing okay?" Again, no response. He wiped his brow and staggered. I assumed he hadn't heard me, so I rested and figured I'd ask again later. Instead, he came over, looking disorientated. "Hey, I'm sorry, I heard you, but..." His voice trailed off. I stood. "Mate, you okay?" I don't know." I noticed grazes to his face, his swollen lip and cuts dotted his legs. I think I fell," he continued. "I don't remember. Where am I?" He trembled, and his face paled. "Mate, sit, here." I offered my shaded perch. He sat, dabbing the blood from his lip. "Do you have any water?" "Yes." He fumbled with the cap, so I unscrewed it for him. "Drink," I said. "Rest, breathe. Rest, breathe deep, keep in the shade, and take a few minutes. I ain't going anywhere." "Thanks." He gulped the water, taking big, heavy breaths, his chest rising and falling. "Do you have any electrolytes? Sugar maybe? A salty snack? Something like that?" I asked. "No." I handed him peanuts and a sachet of electrolyte mix. "Take it easy on the nuts, but drink. Do you have more water?" "Yes. No. I don't think so." I filled his bottle with my water as his complexion coloured. "I fell," he confirmed. "I felt terrible, nauseous and weak. I definitely fell." His injuries were minor, but his condition worried me. The road was 11 miles away. I was concerned. "Do you have any medical issues? Do you take any medication?" "Just blood pressure pills." "Look, mate, you've probably pushed too hard. It's hot, you're dehydrated, and I think you passed out as a result. The electrolytes will kick in, but keep drinking and rest for 30 minutes. "Okay, thanks." I stayed with him for an hour. Rested, he smiled. "It's okay. I'm good." "You sure?" "Yep." "Where are you heading?" He pointed to the trail, to the James River. "Do you want me to walk with you?" "No, I'm fine." I sought eye contact. "I've climbed 11 miles to get here. Believe me, I don't want to do it again. But if you can't descend, tell me, I can come with you." He returned my gaze. "I will help if I don't think you're okay," I reiterated. "I'm fine, thank you. I'm good to go. Here's my cell number." I wrote it on a scrap of paper. "Please message me so I know you're okay. There are other hikers behind me. Stop them if you need to. They'll help you out." I gave him the last of my water and another sachet of electrolytes. I knew the punch bowl shelter with its water source was a mile away. We shook hands and parted. I downed a litre of water at the spring and took another litre with me. I covered 15 miles rapidly and, rounding a switchback, came face to face with a fawn. We stopped 20 feet apart and for a few fleeting seconds stared at each other. I saw its brown eyes as the sun highlighted its fur. It stood motionless, showing no fear. My phone beeped and it darted into the undergrowth, but turned, head over its shoulder for one last look. I checked my phone. "At the river. I'm good. Thanks so much for your help. Best wishes, Dave." I smiled, glad he'd made it. I'd covered little distance due to helping Dave, but ached, keen to reach Brown Mountain Shelter. Deep, bush goggles, turbo toes, dayglow and sun, camped by a sweet spot bordering the creek. I slung the hammock between two perfectly spaced trees. A fire illuminated our surroundings as the day faded, and Brown Mountain Creek tinkled. Talk turned to the Shenandoah National Park, held in high esteem by hikers. Its easier terrain and plentiful eating establishments along Skyline Drive promised relaxed hiking. Gabrielle and her son Max were joining me for a week, and the Shenandoahs looked an ideal place for them. However, when friends join through hikers, plans often don't work out.